We have breaking news coming to you this evening, October 17, 2025. President Trump has just commuted the sentence of the very flamboyant George Santos, who was the former Republican U.S. House of Representatives representing the state of New York. He pleaded guilty on numerous federal charges. For example, such as unauthorized use of donor credit cards, fabricating campaign finance reports, stealing COVID-19 unemployment benefits he wasn't eligible for, and providing information and financial disclosures to the House of Representatives. He basically lied to the people who voted for him to get in U.S. Congress, and he lied on his resume. And so we're going to get into the video. Obviously, this video is made to be a reaction video to news that broke about an hour ago. I came across the video while perusing through social media, as I often do because I'm a content creator. And so we're going to get this story up and live for you now to get more of the details.
All right, everyone. We do want to show you a live look right now. West Palm Beach, Florida. We do have President Trump, Air Force One, just landing. And boy, President Trump broke some news while he was aboard Air Force One. I want to show this to you because it has to do with the incarcerated former Representative George Santos. We are learning now, President Trump putting this out on Truth Social, that he has freed George Santos from federal prison. Take a look at this Truth Social, saying George Santos was somewhat of a rogue, but there are many rogues throughout our country that aren't forced to serve 7 years in prison. I started to think about George when the subject of Democrat Senator Richard Doug Dick Blumenthal came up again. As everyone remembers, Doug Nang stated for almost 20 years that he was a proud Vietnam veteran, having endured the worst of the war, watching the wounded and dead as he raced up the hills and down the valleys, blood streaming from his face. He was a great hero. He would leak to all, and all would listen. And then it happened. He was a complete and total fraud. He never went to Vietnam. He never saw Vietnam. He never experienced the battles there or anywhere else. His war hero status and even minimal service in our military was totally and completely made up.
So this, what they're specifically talking about now, is Richard Blumenthal, who is a U.S. senator. I don't know what state he represents, but the Trump's rationale on his Truth Social post is attempting to justify commuting George Santos's 7-year prison sentence that was handed to him earlier this year in 2025. And so what Trump is saying, that if Richard Blumenthal, a United States senator, can stay in his Senate seat after lying on being involved in the Vietnam War, charging hills, blood streaming down his face, and doing heroic acts, he's saying that George Santos can have his sentence commuted for committing lesser lies or lesser offenses. So that's what this is all about. Let me bring it back a little bit for you. Let me bring it back. Really appreciate the patronage.
Senator Richard Dick Blumenthal came up again. As everyone remembers, Doug Nang stated for almost 20 years that he was a proud Vietnam veteran, having endured the worst of the war, watching the wounded and dead as he raced up the hills and down the valleys, blood streaming from his face. He was a great hero. He would leap to all, and all would listen. And then it happened. He was a complete and total fraud. He never went to Vietnam. He never saw Vietnam. He never experienced the battles there or anywhere else. His war hero status and even minimal service in our military was totally and completely made up. This is far worse than what George Santos did, and at least Santos had the courage, conviction, and intelligence to always vote Republican. George has been in solitary confinement for long stretches of time and by all accounts has been horribly mistreated. Therefore, I just signed a commutation releasing George Santos from prison immediately. Good luck, George, and have a great life. It ended there. So I just want to give you a little breakdown of George Santos, and he was sentenced to 87 months in prison. That was more than 7 years back on April 25th of this year after pleading guilty to federal fraud charges. He reported to the Federal Correctional Institution in New Jersey back on July 25th, 2025, to begin his sentence. And then just months later, getting the news now that President Trump has freed him. And wow, what a moment here on this Friday edition of Live Down from Fox. Again, this is just a video that we had here in our system. But again, President Trump commutes George Santos' prison sentence, releasing him from over 7 years that he would have to serve on federal charges. He reported back on July 25th of this year after he was sentenced back on April 25th of this year after pleading guilty to federal fraud charges. So that is the big news here of this afternoon. Live look right now, Air Force One. We will see President Trump get down the steps in just moments, and we'll see if he speaks to the media after this big news story on this Friday evening, as President Trump just moments away from heading down the steps of Air Force One in West Palm Beach and then heading over to Mar-a-Lago. We will take a 2-minute break on Live Down from Fox. We will be keeping it.
All right, so you heard that. I got a quick analysis on this. George Santos, a former U.S. House of Representative, a Republican representing New York State, was kicked out of Congress for behavior unbecoming a congressman. You're supposed to be forthright and forthcoming about your history, about your financial disclosures, and you're supposed to sign and recognize the guidelines on how to spend campaign funds. You're supposed to be transparent about that 100% of the time, because there will be audits. There will be the imposing party audits on your record. So you got to make sure that your records are straight. You got to make sure that your nose is clean. You got to make sure that everything that you present to the public is truthful and verifiable. George Santos didn't do it. So he got kicked out of Congress, further narrowing the Republican majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. I think that they have about a cushion of 5 Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives to pass bills into law aligned with President Trump's agenda. And we have to recognize that there are congressmen and women who have done way worse than George Santos. So why was George Santos kicked out of U.S. Congress? It was in the best interest of the Democratic Party to further narrow the Republican majority in the U.S. House of Representatives so that Republicans can have a harder time passing bills into law that align with President Trump's America First agenda. And so now you have his sentence being commuted. Basically, his sentence is dropped and he's a free man. I mean, he may be in transport to his hometown as we speak. I don't have the details of that. I think this is a story that is follow-up worthy. Another thing that I want to say is that Trump has a knack of changing the narrative right before a weekend. And although we're going to experience no Kings protests throughout the weekend, throughout the country, this is going to be some talking points as far as George Santos' sentence being dropped and him being a free man technically. That is going to take up some of the airwaves on the weekend and co-inhabit the sphere of the news cycle. Of course, the Democrats and the mainstream media, who is the Democratic arm of their message, would have loved to just only focus on the No Kings protests and the local law enforcement within those respective cities, on how they respond to potential violence going on this weekend because of those protests. Now they have to share the airwaves on George Santos being freed from prison. Another thing that I want to bring up is that this move to free George Santos, and I've already alluded to him being a very flamboyant man. All you have to do is just look at my thumbnail, and I could tell you, President Trump, this is a power move for President Trump to expand his base. Now, I can only assume that George Santos is not 100% straight man. I don't ding him for that. I don't look down on that. That is not a route that I would take personally. But you got to understand that when you tap into some of the non-traditional voting bodies, we would, as Republicans in the MAGA party, we have to imagine ways to expand our base. And by freeing George Santos on this day, October 17th, 2025, I think that it's a win-win situation. Obviously a win for George Santos, but I think that a residual win will occur on the MAGA side, because now George Santos has an incentive to go out to the people who supported him and the people that stuck by his side, even those people that were on the fence, like independents or non-voters. He has the capacity now and the incentive to bring them into the fold of the MAGA party. Look, George Santos voted 95% for the Trump agenda before he got kicked out of U.S. Congress. And we can definitely use the services of George Santos and people like him and his supporters. But I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I respond to every comment, whether good or bad, or if I don't even understand what the person is saying. But I respond nonetheless. And, just keep an eye out for my next video. It'll be coming out soon. I'm hitting this thing hard. Really appreciate your patronage. And I'll see you in the next one.